Hello, I'm back with a new video, and in this one we'll be using Virtual Machine Manager to add USB devices and USB controllers to our virtual machines. This guide should work for people who are doing GPU pass-through and people who are just running the virtual machine in windowed mode. The steps don't change either way. First, let's talk briefly about adding individual USB devices. The advantage of doing it this way is that there is basically no setup required. You don't have to change anything in BIOS. You just go to add hardware, USB host device, and pick the device you want to use. You do it before the virtual machine starts, select what you want to use, and finish. So I didn't add anything because I want to show you this. When you start the virtual machine, you can simply go to virtual machine right here, redirect USB device, and add whatever USB device you want to use with your virtual machine. So adding an individual USB device works great when you just want to do something quick and easy. You don't want to spend time setting up anything and you just want it to work out of the box. Now let's move on to the more interesting stuff. Now, if you want to have a little more advanced setup, and you want to be able to plug in and unplug USB devices without accessing the host, you might want to pass through an entire USB controller. To pass an entire USB controller, you have to modify grub. So let's open the terminal. Let's become a super user. Let's open nano, etc, default, and grub. If you are doing GPU pass-through and you have that already working, you don't have to do anything here because all of the required steps were done when performing GPU pass-through. If you are not, you have to have your virtualization extensions enabled in BIOS, VTD and VTX on Intel, and IOMMU and SVM on AMD. And all you need to do in grub is this line that ends in quiet and splash. You have to add, depending on whether you are using AMD or Intel or AMD underscore IOMMU equals on, and save it. Control O, enter, Control X, and then you need to update your grub. Depending on your distro, the command is different. On Ubuntu, it's update-grub and reboot. And now that the machine has rebooted, let's go to GitHub, and I'll leave the link in the video description, and let's download IOMMU viewer. It's not necessary, but we will want to see what our IOMMU groups look like. So we download it, open it, extract it, open your terminal, and let's go to downloads, and let's make it executable. So chmod plus x IOMMU viewer. Okay, let's run it. So let's find the USB controller that we can use. I see one here, but this one shares its IOMMU group, group number 3, with the memory controller. So we cannot use that one. Let's see what else we have here. In group number 13, there is another USB controller, nothing else in that group, so this one should be usable. If you are only trying to pass through the USB controller and nothing else, make sure it's in its own IOMMU group. If you are doing a GPU pass-through too, and those two share the IOMMU group, so the GPU you are passing through and the USB controller, that should be fine, and you should be able to use it. Basically, look at it this way. When doing any sort of pass-through, you are passing through an entire IOMMU group. You cannot pass some devices from an IOMMU group and leave some with the host. You have to take the group as a whole. You cannot pick and choose. If your IOMMU groups don't look right, I'll leave a link in the video description that will help you install a kernel with an ACS patch already applied. If you want to know more about IOMMU groups, I'll also leave a link to a video that will help you understand this topic better. So let's remember this via technologies, and we will try to assign this controller to our virtual machine. So let's open Virtual Machine Manager. Here's our virtual machine. And let's add hardware. And let's find PCI host devices. And as we said, via technologies, USB controller. And finish. And now when we boot this virtual machine, it should boot with the controller and ready to be used. So let's start it. So here we are. Let's open the device manager, and on the very bottom, universal serial bus controllers via USB 3.0. So it's fairly simple adding a USB controller to your virtual machine. Whether you are running GPU pass-through or not, the steps are the same, and now you should be able to plug in and unplug devices as if you were using a standalone computer. So now let's talk about choosing the right controller card that you can use with your virtual machine. When choosing a PCI Express USB expansion card, I wouldn't go spending too much money on them. Generally, the cheap ones will work just as well as the more expensive ones. And I will show you some cards that I have used previously and they work fine. So this one, the Saiba 2-port USB card, works fine. It's actually an IOCrest card. Just if you ever buy it and you see something a different manufacturer than what's advertised, but it works fine. No problems with that for me. This Enatech, the same thing, works fine. No issues with that one. This Vantech. So this is one caveat there. This Vantech, I've used it for years and it always worked fine for me. And then when I upgraded to Z490, suddenly when I booted my virtual machine, it would freeze right away with this card in. With any other expansion card, it would work just fine. When this expansion card is in a different machine, everything works fine. Pass-through works fine, no problems. But for my Z490 Prime, yeah, it wouldn't work when passed through. So you could run into some of these random issues. But again, that's why you buy a cheap card so that you can replace it more easily if it doesn't work in your particular situation. And then there are the more expensive cards, like for example this Vantech quad chip card and StarTech equivalent and some other ones. I would avoid these or any multi-chip cards, let's say USB and SATA or anything like that. Some of them do work, but unless you see reviews saying that that particular model works, don't buy them because most of them end up not working. And this Vantech and StarTech equivalent of this thing, they don't work when it comes to pass-through. They will show up, but they will never work. So, and this only applies to pass-through. If you just want to add some USB ports to your machine and you want a quad chip card, go ahead and buy this Vantech or StarTech or any of them. They work fine when it comes to bare metal, non-pass-through performance. You should be fine. I mean, no complaints there. But for pass-through, any multi-chip card or multi-device card, I would go and look specifically for somebody who successfully managed to pass it through and says that they work. Otherwise, avoid them. You might be able to save money and not have to buy anything, especially if you are running, let's say, an NVIDIA GPU that has a built-in USB. You might be able to use it with your virtual machine just fine. For my RTX card, when I connect a virtual reality headset to it, it works fine. But when I try to connect the mouse to it, I would get these significant lag spikes where it would just, the mouse wouldn't move even though I'm moving it. So it might not be the best idea to connect the mouse to it. I don't know, maybe your mileage might vary. But another option would be if you have a controller on your motherboard that's in its own IOMMU group, you might be able to use that. So you might have different options than buying a USB controller card. So that's all for USB controller pass-through. I hope it was informative, and I'll see you in the next video.